Special Operations Training Detachment, AOBWest, Burro Team. Coming at you from NTC, Off the Radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an Observer Coach Trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center.
So today on our podcast, we're going to talk with Major Phil Ficken, the Special Operations Training Detachment AOB-West officer in charge, also known as the AOB-West Commander, unofficially. Burro 7, he is going to describe to us what center of gravity and critical factors analysis is, and then how it can be used to help the tactical element actually understand their targeting cycle. So, Major Ficken, will you give us a brief introduction on yourself, time in SOF, your time in the Army, and anything else you'd like to share before we dive into this?
Sure. Yeah. I have been in the Army since 2009. Started off as an infantry officer and then went over to SOF in 2013. So I've spent just over a decade in SOF and had a really great time doing it. I spent most of my time at 5th Special Forces Group before coming out here. So really excited to talk a little bit about centers of gravity and critical factors analysis, because this is something that I learned in the SOF Operational Design Course when I had the opportunity to go to that. And the critical factors analysis portion of that course really stuck with me and has been extremely useful operationally. And now as a part of the Special Operations Training Detachment, I think it's something that is important for our SOF formations to understand so that we can be disciplined in the way that we're targeting. Because at the end of the day, we want to play judo with the enemy. You know, SOF is a small force, so we have limited resources, limited people. And if we can, do that small movement that makes an outsized impact, that's what we want to do. And I think that's what critical factors analysis really gives us a tool to do that systematically. And
I've tried to use their momentum against them, huh?
That's exactly right.
Okay. Did you attend that course when you were a detachment commander or when you were sitting on group staff? Or
So I did it after my detachment command time when I was a AS3 for a battalion AS3. So I was kind of a senior captain at that point.
Okay.
And I will definitely say that I think in the staff world, kind of working at the battalion level and above is definitely where I've had the most use for it.
Okay.
But I really do think that it is applicable all the way down to the tactical level. So if you go back to the Q course and the targeting, when we talk about like targeting methodologies, we could probably talk about Carver analysis as a way to take this like all the way down to the very tactical level. But kind of even at the tactical level, if you're coming up with an operation as a special forces detachment, I really do think that you can still use this methodology successfully. And particularly when we talk about NTC, our primary training audiences on the SOF side are typically companies and above.
Yeah.
So a company or battalion level headquarters. This is definitely applicable at that level.
Yeah.
And when I was at AS3, actually, right after going to the course, I deployed and had a lot of opportunity to use this. I did a lot of cross-talking with our S2 elements at the SOTF level staff, at that battalion level staff, and we implemented this methodology with good effect. I won't be able to talk about all of that,
that's totally
unfortunately,
fine.
but I think we can talk about some examples of how it works and give everyone an idea of that.
All right. So before we get into the weeds on examples, I think we got to do some like definitions and some overview of what you mean. And a lot of this derives from that joint publication 5-0, chapter 4, right?
Yeah, chapter 4 is the operational design chapter of Joint Pub 5.0, and that is the doctrine that the SOF Operational Design Course pulls from for all this. And this is all open source. You can look it up. I think that when we talk about definitions, really the starting thing we got to talk about is centers of gravity, because ultimately a center of gravity, and this is straight out of the reg, center of gravity is the source of power or strength that enables a military force to achieve its objective and is what an opposing force can orient its actions against that will lead to enemy failure. So kind of in layman's terms, we're talking about, hey, what is the key component to your strength? and measuring that against the key component to your enemy's strength, and then there's a battle against those two and see who wins out. So that's if we say COG, center of gravity, that's kind of the definition there. And critical factors analysis is simply just a framework that we can use to analyze and identify COGs and to identify what we should be doing in order to defeat the enemy's center of gravity or centers of gravity.
Yeah, so they can have more than one.
They can I think they absolutely can. This is a hotly debated topic in the maybe in the officer world. Yeah, this is is there one cog or are there multiple cogs? I think you can absolutely have multiples.
Yeah. Okay, so like for an NTC example, I mean, fuel is important for an armored force.
Sure.
So if maybe that's a critical capability, maybe not a center of gravity for them?
Well, so I'll break it down because there's really three components to critical factors analysis. The first part is identifying what are the critical capabilities of the enemy. So that means, what a critical capability is just the primary abilities that are essential to the accomplishment of their mission. So in your, you talk about fuel for an armor brigade. In order for them to maneuver, they need fuel for their tanks to move, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that maneuver is actually a critical capability. We move into the second thing, which is the critical requirements, and fuel is going to be a critical requirement to enable that.
Yeah, that definitely sounds
critical capability.
More applicable.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have critical capabilities, critical requirements. What was the third thing?
So the third one is critical vulnerabilities. And the key here is what of the critical requirements are we able to target based on our capabilities and resources available? And maybe the environmental considerations too. So if we determine that we can shoot fuel trucks, for example, or we have some way to sabotage their fuel source or to disrupt it, then you could say that fuel in your example is a critical vulnerability. And then what happens after you've identified and kind of broken these things down is you need to do an assessment of the critical vulnerabilities and there's four things that that JP50 states that you should look at. It's the accessibility, redundancy, resiliency, and impact of targeting those critical vulnerabilities. And so what you might find is, and I'll use your example of the fuel. If you determine that like, hey, fuel, I want to target fuel trucks because I think that fuel is a critical vulnerability and I have a way to kill fuel trucks on the battlefield. What you have to look at is, okay, well, how many fuel trucks do they have?
Yep.
Do I have enough, javelins or sticky bombs or whatever to defeat enough of these fuel trucks to actually stop them from executing their critical capability of maneuver? And so what you might find is, okay, well, they've got 1 million fuel trucks and I've only got 50 sticky bombs.
Yeah.
So it's a critical vulnerability. I can target it, but it's resilient enough and redundant enough and it's not accessible enough maybe for me that it's not worth targeting. So I'm going to choose not to target that vulnerability as a result. I'm going to look for a vulnerability that, maybe if they have 50 fuel trucks and I've got 100 sticky bombs, now we're talking because I can say, okay, I can take out that capability. And if they don't have fuel, they don't maneuver. And that's a key factor to keep in mind because the part of critical factors analysis that really resonates with me is the fact that if you take out one of these critical vulnerabilities, it neutralizes the critical capability. If you don't meet that criteria, it's not a critical vulnerability. So I think that's sort of a test.
So
sort
taking
of a
out
test.
one fuel truck or one tank doesn't interrupt their maneuver.
It might have a disrupting effect, but exactly right. It doesn't completely neutralize that capability.
Yeah.
So being able to find critical vulnerabilities that completely, you can completely, attack or neutralize their critical capability. That's really what you're looking for. That's the key to success. And when you're looking at like the operational and strategic level implementation of this, it's really how we win wars, because we can fight strength on strength. And that's when we talk about like the brigade on brigade, division on division, tank battles, we're fighting strength on strength. But if we want to, for SOF, we don't have the ability to do that. We have limited resources and people.
Yeah.
We're playing that judo game. So if we can take out one of their critical resources with a limited amount of our own forces and resources, then now we've had an outsized impact. That's what we're looking to do.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to use speed, surprise, audacity,
Absolutely.
all that things. I would, throw in with the MDO, multi-domain operations, try to like converge efforts in time and space.
100%.
But the accessibility, redundancy, resiliency, and impact, as soon as you said that, it kind of made me immediately go back to the Carver.
Right. There's a lot of
Carver
similarities
analysis that you just had brought up at the beginning of this, and it's like, wow, okay, there is a lot of overlap there. So.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about kind of trying to come up with an example to talk through this, and I think the example you gave is a good one. And I think that if I'm really wanting to explain a little bit more about how to break this down as you take a systematic approach to using critical factors analysis, my preferred method is to get a whiteboard, get a giant whiteboard, start on the left side with, with what you think your centers of gravity are, or your critical, your critical capabilities that the enemy has. Write those down and then work your way to the right with two other sections. So on the left, you've got a list of critical capabilities. In the middle, you've got a list of the critical requirements for those critical capabilities. So meaning, hey, these are the requirements that you have to have in order for these critical capabilities to work. Again, if without one of those requirements, the capability still works, it's not a critical requirement.
Okay.
And then, so that's the center portion, is that critical requirements. And then you can circle the requirements that you have the ability to target.
And
in
those
one
are
way.
your vulnerabilities.
And those are your vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And
or
now
the enemy's vulnerabilities for you to target.
Correct. And so now you can use that and look at, okay, what critical requirements actually bridge across multiple critical capabilities? Because you might be able to get 2 for 1, 3 for 1. Maybe that you're in your example of fuel. Maybe that fuel is actually a critical requirement, not just for maneuver, but also for other critical capabilities that you care about with the enemy. So if you can, again, target that fuel piece, you might take away more than just the one thing.
Yeah.
Which is great. So you want to look for those.
I mean, maybe it degrades their fires because
absolutely
they got to move ammo, or they have to, the paladins or whatever they have can't move because they don't have fuel, because they're giving the fuel, the limited fuel they have to the tanks or something like that.
Absolutely. And, and then at the end of the day, it all feeds into your target analysis. You got to come up with a course of action of how you're going to, how you're going to attack the enemy here. So the one other thing I really want to mention about this too, it's easy to think about it in terms of, concrete things. We know how to put a bomb on a target, but it doesn't have to be a concrete thing. It can also be a, and I'm trying to, I feel like I had a note here about a good way to say this, and I
intangible.
Don't know where it is. It can be an intangible effect.
Yeah.
For example, morale of the enemy,
okay,
or your will to fight, or your will to do a specific action even. And that's important because we shouldn't just be thinking about hey, let's put a bomb on the target, or a bullet in, or, a hole in the tank, or a bullet in the enemy.
Yeah.
We need to think about populations, networks.
Well, there's that whole non-kinetic or non-lethal target side of it.
That's exactly right. So that plays into this too. And, you could potentially have just as an example, you could have a psychological operation that influences an enemy commander to make a decision that neutralizes one of his critical capabilities. Like that could be something that works into your analysis, your critical factors analysis.
Yeah.
So it's
and the line of effort of that could be through cyber or social media or something.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that's important to work into. So I came up with a dumb example.
No, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so
I want to hear it.
This is with thinking about a non-classified example, I'll just put it that way. But I wanted to provide something. So, if you, Weston, want to keep me from going on my, Christmas break leave to go see some family, how could we do a critical factors analysis of that? And so I've kind of got this broken down just as an example. And we can think about what are some of the critical capabilities that I have that are going to enable me to do my operation. And then what are the resources required for that, my critical resources? And then finally, what are the critical vulnerabilities that maybe you could take advantage of?
Okay.
So just to make it very simple here, like I've broken it down really, I'm going to say that my 4 capabilities are critical capabilities are transportation, because I got to travel call it 500 miles plus for the sake of the example. I got to travel 500 miles plus to get to family. So transportation is number 1. Number 2, lodging. I got to have a place for me and my family to lodge while we're in transit and at destination.
Yep.
I got to have communication, because I have to coordinate this visit with my family, right? I got to be able to communicate.
No, you just want to show up unannounced.
Well, I guess I could. Maybe that's a bad one, but for the sake of the example, we'll say it's one.
Nobody wants
uninvited visitors.
Uninvited guests, or just family that shows up without heads up. So.
That's true. That's true. Make it an interesting visit. And then number 4, we talked a little bit about the intangibles a moment ago. My will or motivation to visit my family, I think you could say that that's a critical capability for me to do that operation.
Well, yeah. Takes effort.
So
you got to get that whole fire team of kids packed up.
That's right.
In the van.
Oh, it's an operation in and of itself. But so what's my motivation to do that? And you could probably think of some other ones to fill this out, but we'll cap it at those 4 for the sake of the example. Okay. So if you imagine that I've written those 4 things on the left side of a whiteboard, now we're going to move to the middle, and for each one kind of break out what are some of the key requirements, the critical requirements for these things. So I'm going to say one of the critical requirements is finances.
Yep. That's
going to play into, whether I'm driving or flying. Like I got to have money to be able to buy a ticket or fuel for my car or a hotel room or any of that. So that finances piece definitely we're going to draw some lines to multiple of the critical capabilities, because that is a critical requirement for several of those.
Gotcha.
Okay. The second one, I'm going to say specifically for ground travel, accessibility to fuel.
Okay.
And we've got gas stations all over the U.S., right? So if I have access to those, I can take my car to the gas station, but that is absolutely a critical requirement for me.
Yeah.
I don't have an electric car. So for me to get across the country if I drive. The third one that I'll throw out there is, again, related to the ground transportation side, a working vehicle to drive in.
Okay.
Or maybe a vehicle that fits and has enough seats to fit my whole family. That can be
drive somewhere.
Yeah.
Airport or all the way.
Absolutely. So we'll say a working vehicle.
Yep.
Another one that I'll throw out there is time. Mm-hmm. So I've got I'm in the Army. I have a certain number of days of leave that I can take.
Yep.
I've got a certain calendar block, where I can take block leave over Christmas break. So these are all limitations of time. Also the amount of travel time that it takes me to get from my duty station to family, right?
Yeah.
So all those play into time. I already mentioned lodging.
Yep.
But whether that's a hotel room or extra room at my parents' house or a tent on the side of the road, something like that, we got some options there.
I could see the Fickens camping out on the side of the road.
We do like to camp. So I'm not going to lie. That is an option for sure. Maybe not an ideal option for my wife, though. I think she'd probably prefer to sleep in a bed.
Yeah, but didn't you guys
I would too.
Camp at the Grand Canyon last Christmas time, last December?
Not in December.
Okay.
We did go. It was winter. It was pretty cold.
Yeah, I remember you saying it was cold. All right, we'll get back to our example.
So anyway, lodging's one. And then for the communication piece, I'll add 2 in there. One would be phone communication. We could break these down, cell network, accessibility, cell phones, etc. But we'll just leave it at access to phones. I'll say access to email. Those are probably my 2 most common means of communication. And then the last one that I'll throw out there is the perception of my family. Is it positive, neutral, negative? Mm-hmm. Just to give an intangible factor. Yeah. And we could come up with a couple other ones. So we'll work off of that. So I think, what do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different critical requirements that we've identified. And some of them go to multiple different critical capabilities here. So based on these, now I'm going to look at you, because you're the enemy in this example.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so
I'm preventing your
what
lead.
What is Weston going to be able to do? What can he target of these critical requirements? And so I'm going to say,
I'm going to tell you forgot to pay for your team fund.
Well, that could play into it, right? So I'm going to say for finances, let's say I'm living paycheck to paycheck, and you know this. That's part of your Intel assessment that you've got.
All right.
And you have the ability to put in a nefarious personnel action request that to the Army Finance Department, right?
Yeah.
That's going to shut off my pay for 1 month.
Oof.
So we're just going to say that you have the capability to affect my finances
Wow.
in that way. That's pretty harsh. I hope you don't do that. Please don't take that as an idea. So there's one right there. How about fuel?
Okay.
There's gas stations everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a pretty redundant system and resilient system. I've got lots of places to get gas.
High accessibility, high redundancy.
So when we looked at those 4 factors, accessibility, redundancy, resiliency, and impact, that's not meeting any of those requirements probably. So I'm going to just cross that one off to say I'm not even going to try and target fuel
Okay.
for this operation.
No, I'm not going to.
You're right.
Me.
Weston is not going to try and target the fuel because that's not going to have that same effect that you would want it to. So you're crossing that off the list. So let's go down the line though. How about working vehicle?
Okay.
So let's say that you have the capability to sabotage my vehicle. That makes
if you only
it
have one vehicle that's
right,
not resilient or redundant.
right. So we're going to say that yes, that is a critical vulnerability. Now, I think we also have to look at, okay, what is the impact? What is the redundancy of this? I could switch to air travel. So you could argue that maybe this is a little bit redundant, like there's some redundancy options that you could, maybe you sabotage my vehicle and I say, okay, well, I still have the finances. I'm going to buy airline tickets for my family and we're just going to fly.
Yeah.
And now you've failed to accomplish your mission because that's what redundancy is right there. So it's a critical vulnerability by definition, but as a commander, you're making the decision, okay, do I choose to target this or not? So that's in the back of your head. Let's talk about time though. You could use that same vehicle sabotage methodology to steal my time.
Yeah.
So give me a flat tire along the way a couple times. It's already maybe like a day or 2 travel time. You add an additional day on each side. You've maybe eaten up now, say 4 days of my leave right there.
Yeah.
Potentially. So you could maybe have an effect on me based on time if you can frame it that way.
Gotcha. Okay.
Lodging, again, I think I'm throwing that into the same category as the gas stations. You got hotels everywhere. I got friends and family. Like we got a tent that we could put on the side of the road. Like that's a pretty redundant option. So lodging, we're going to cross that one off the list too. Phone and email, very redundant and resilient. You're not, unless you can take down the infrastructure in the U.S. Good luck.
I'll just issue you a box phone and then
once I leave, you just switch my SIM card. Once I leave Fort Irwin, I can't talk to anyone.
Yeah.
But then, okay, here's the interesting one though. Let's talk about perception of my family.
Okay.
Because when we look at some of the intangibles, I think this is a good example. If you ran a PSYOP campaign that actually drove wedges in my perception of my family,
okay,
and I start having a more negative view of my family, you could potentially influence me not to go on this trip.
Yep.
Because I decide that I don't want to deal with the fallout of being with my extended family.
Yeah.
So that would be a completely non-kinetic option to overturning my critical capability here. Okay. So I think that's something to look at. So at the end of the day, I think what we've kind of talked about is like finances and time were potentially maybe 2 of the really interesting ones that you think you might be able to affect. I would argue that based on what we talked about, maybe finances would be the best one to attack.
Okay.
Because if you attack my finances...
Well, if I do have that capability.
Assuming you have that capability.
Yeah.
You're potentially going to be able to disrupt my ability to conduct any sort of transportation.
Yep.
I can't buy an airline ticket or gas or repair my car or any of that.
Or a hotel room.
Or get a hotel room without finances. There might be issues with lodging. En route, at least. Maybe I would be forced to sleep in a tent at least. Okay. I guess that's a potentially free or cheap option. Again, like once I get to destination, maybe I stay with friends and family. But you probably have a disrupting effect on lodging and potentially a disrupting effect on communication because maybe I can't pay my internet and cell phone bill without finances. So I would argue that just on this example, I would potentially choose finances as something to target my efforts against and look at different ways to take out that critical requirement.
Okay. So like everything into finances or like we're just going to put a lot of effort towards finances.
So,
and
yeah, and that's, this is a really good
sprinkle in
question.
a couple other things.
No, that's a great question, because I think that it is really important to mass your effects into your decisive operation.
Okay.
And if you can put as much effort as you can into the one thing that you know is going to defeat the enemy's capability and the enemy's defeat the enemy's center of gravity,
Yeah.
you should do that. Put all your resources into that and don't worry about the rest, because you're going to defeat them based on that.
Yeah.
What we see in theater sometimes, I've seen this a lot in my career, is, hey, we've got enemy defensive fighting positions everywhere, so we're just going to drop a bomb on everyone that we find. Well, that doesn't, at the end of the day, actually defeat the enemy. Instead, if we focus on the critical capability, in this example, finances, we can actually defeat the capability and overturn the enemy's center of gravity and actually win. So the other, part of the using this framework is just having a systematic method to analyze, come up with a course of action, and then assess if you're going to be successful. So we're not doing random acts of targeting. We're doing directed targeting that is going to take fewer resources and have an outsized greater effect on the enemy that ultimately results in victory. And, when things get much more complex, having a good framework is extremely important.
Yeah. So is this something that a staff is developing to give a commander, hey, this is the proposed lines of effort or course of action, or is
Absolutely.
the commander then using that to develop course of action guidance? Or
I think the best implementation is for the staff to be the proponent for implementing this.
Okay.
Like, I found a lot of use for it when I was working as a assistant S3 and then later as a S3. I think that it's very applicable in the intel world and sort of all the folks who are involved in like a targeting working group.
Yeah.
This is absolutely a framework that you could use in that context for any of those participants to then spit out a suggested course of action or multiple courses of action for the commander to choose from. So that's what I would recommend doing it. If we take it all the way down to the tactical level too, for say a Special Forces ODA, you could use that in the exact same context.
Yeah.
And come out with courses of action of how to defeat a certain enemy capability that is within your scope of operations.
Yeah.
So I really do think, and the Joint Pub will tell you the same thing, that it's applicable from the tactical all the way up to the strategic level. And I truly believe that. It's just a little bit different implementation. And when you get all the way down to the tactical level, you might find yourself really switching down to that Carver analysis to break down the final, what's and hows of, how to target my finances specifically, kind of the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, this seems kind of more like giving us COAs or lines of effort, and then you go down from there. I feel like one thing we typically see, at least when I was OCing detachments, okay, I know I'm going to do MDMP, and then I'm going to go into the field, and I'm not going to do MDMP or military decision-making process anymore. Is this something you'd recommend? Like, you're doing this at every step along the way, and like as the battlefield progresses, the critical resources may change. Maybe the majority of their critical capabilities stay the same, but like the way that they're using their resources changes, and then therefore the way you can target and their vulnerabilities may change. Saying that this should be like a living thing that, you continue to iterate and not necessarily do once and then hang up and say, hey, we did it.
I totally agree with that. I think it is an iterative process. You can use it from the start with what information you have, but you're right. Even the enemy's critical capabilities might change mid-operation. So everything should be reassessed and you can relook at this. And when I've used this in real life, it was very often like me and a green notebook and a couple of intel folks and other people who are involved in a targeting working group, literally just sitting around a piece of paper and drawing out kind of what I described that you might do on a whiteboard or a notebook circled up and just doing it on the fly over the course of 30, 45 minutes to reassess our targeting methodology. And I think that is a easy way to implement it. You can obviously be much more deliberate about it, especially if you're doing operational design at the strategic level or something like that. You're going to maybe be working at a TSOC or something like that.
Yeah.
Coming up with O plans. Like that's going to be a much more deliberate process. Probably the further down to the tactical level that you get, the more iterative and the more, frequent that re-engagement in the analysis should be.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have, through our role players, teach, coach, and mentor to get the all of the SOF entities, whether they're a civil affairs team or a ODA or the AOB, to do a target process and do it daily so they know what's coming up ahead of time, and they can actually like try to figure out how to affect the battlefield.
Absolutely.
Alongside of that conventional force. So,
well, the other thing that we can mention, and this is maybe kind of like my last point, we talked a lot about critical factors analysis and how we can use it to target the enemy, but we can also flip that around to think about how to protect ourselves. Okay. Because if we run critical factors analysis on our own critical capabilities, we can look at, first we can identify what are the critical vulnerabilities that we need to protect, and then come up with courses of action on how to protect those things, or introduce more accessibility, redundancy, resiliency, impact, kind of those factors so that we're less targetable by the enemy.
Yeah, something that came to mind when you said that is like the communication, because that's huge out here for the AOB down to the downtrace units. But when you key up a mic or send a data package or whatever you're doing, you are presenting a vulnerability because you're emitting a signature. So like, how do you make that more resilient, redundant, and less accessible to the enemy?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got some good TCPs that I'm sure we can talk about in other podcast episodes.
So appreciate your time, sir. Like, for anyone out there listening, get into that joint publication, read up, prepare, all applicable across all tribes, all levels, tactical, operational, strategic. And anybody else out there listening, if you're from the conventional force, dig into it as well and learn about it. So, sir, any final thoughts?
No, I think that I hope this was helpful for everyone out there who's listening. And I think it's a good framework to just be more systematic about how we target. I really do think that we've wasted a lot of effort in warfighting by not being as systematic as we should be. So this is just a simple way that has been very helpful for me. I hope it's helpful for everyone else. I hope to see more headquarters coming into NTC and implementing this right off the bat, because I think they'll find a lot of success.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where RSOF prepares for conflict. Like, subscribe, and share on your listening platform.
Actions will determine the outcome.